There are two kinds of courage in this world. The first is the courage to throw a punch. The second is the courage to stand perfectly still while someone aims a gun at your chest and crack a joke about it. Dean Martin had the second kind. On the night of November 12, 1963, at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, Dean Martin walked onto a stage knowing that a man who'd killed 17 people was sitting in the front row, waiting for him to make a mistake. And what Dean did in the next 60 seconds didn't just save his career, it redefined what it meant to be the king of cool. This is the story of the night Dean Martin refused to bow to the mob. Las Vegas, 1963, was a city owned by shadows. The neon lights on the strip blazed bright enough to be seen from space. But the real power in Vegas operated in darkness. The casinos weren't run by businessmen in boardrooms. They were controlled by men with names like Giancana, Lansky, and Accardo, men who settled disputes with car bombs and cement shoes, men who could make you a star or make you disappear with equal ease. And every entertainer who worked the Vegas Strip knew the rules. You show up on time. You perform. You keep your mouth shut about who you see and what you hear. And above all, you never, ever disrespect the people who sign your checks. Dean Martin knew these rules better than anyone. He'd grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, where mob guys weren't movie villains, they were neighbors. They ran the gambling houses and the speakeasies. Dean had dealt blackjack in their card rooms when he was 16, using the name Dino Crocetti. He understood their world. He spoke their language. His education in mob psychology had started early. When Dean was 17, working as a dealer in a backroom casino on South 6th Street, a local enforcer named Tony the Blade Rizzo had accused him of cheating. The accusation was false. Dean was an honest dealer even then, but Tony wanted someone to blame for his losing streak. Tony had grabbed Dean by the collar, lifted him off his feet, and said, "You're shorting me, kid. I know it." Dean, dangling in the air, had looked Tony dead in the eye and said, "If I was cheating you, Tony, you'd be winning. That's how cheating works." The room had gone silent. Everyone expected Tony to break Dean's nose, maybe worse, but instead Tony had laughed. He'd laughed so hard he'd dropped Dean and clapped him on the shoulder. "This kid's got stones," Tony had said. "I like him." From that moment, Dean understood something crucial. Men who live by intimidation respect one thing above all else: the refusal to be intimidated. Show them fear and they own you. Show them strength and they might actually respect you. That lesson had served him well in the years that followed. When he started performing in mob-owned clubs across Ohio and Pennsylvania, Dean never acted like he was afraid. He never cowered. He performed his set, collected his pay, and treated the wise guys in the audience like any other patrons, with basic courtesy, but never with subservience. By the time Dean hit Vegas in the late 50s, he'd been around organized crime for 20 years. He knew how they operated. He knew their codes, their hierarchies, their unwritten rules. And most importantly, he knew the difference between respecting someone's power and surrendering to it. But understanding the rules and following them blindly were two different things. The trouble started 3 weeks before the incident. Dean was in the middle of his residency at the Sands, doing 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week. The Sands was the crown jewel of Vegas in 1963, a palace of marble and crystal where Sinatra, Dean, and Sammy Davis Jr. performed to sold-out crowds every single night. The Rat Pack owned that stage. They owned that town. On October 22nd, a man named Salvatore Sally Burns, Bonfiglio, checked into the Sands penthouse suite. Sally Burns wasn't his real name, of course. Nobody in his line of work used real names, but everyone in Vegas knew who he was. He was a capo in the Chicago outfit, a made man who reported directly to Sam Giancana. He'd earned his nickname in 1952 when he burned down a restaurant in Cleveland because the owner refused to pay protection money. 3 people died in that fire. Sally Burns never spent a day in jail for it. Now, he was in Vegas, and according to Jack and Tratter, the Sands entertainment director, Sally Burns had come specifically to see Dean Martin perform. "He's a fan," Tratter told Dean in his office the day Sally checked in. Says he's seen you perform 12 times, knows all your songs. Dean was sitting in a leather chair, smoking a cigarette, his feet up on Intratter's desk. He'd perfected the art of looking completely relaxed in every situation. That's nice, Jack. I appreciate fans. This isn't a normal fan, Dino. Intratter's face was serious. This guy's connected, high up. Word is he's in town handling some business for Chicago. So he's asked for a personal introduction. Wants to meet you after tonight's show. Dean took a long drag from his cigarette. I got a rule, Jack. I don't do meet and greets with people who've got more blood on their hands than a butcher. Intrator leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Dean, you can't say no to this guy. He's not asking. When men like Sally Burns request something, it's not a request. It's not a command either, Dean said, standing up. I perform, that's my job. Meeting psychopaths in private isn't in my contract, Dino. Jack, I like you, you've been good to me, but I draw lines. And one of those lines is, I don't kiss the ring of every thug who buys a front row ticket. Dean walked out before Entratter could respond. That night, Dean performed his usual show. 200 people packed into the Copa room. Dean sang, That's Amore, Ain't That a Kick in the Head, and Everybody Loves Somebody. He told jokes between songs, sipped from a glass that everyone assumed was whiskey. It was usually apple juice. Dean's drunk persona was 90% performance and had the audience eating out of his hand. In the front row, center table, sat Sally Burns. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and hands like anvils. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. His face was hard, with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. A souvenir from a knife fight in his youth. He didn't smile during the show, didn't laugh at Dean's jokes, just sat there, watching, studying. After the show, Dean went backstage to his dressing room. He was toweling off the stage sweat when there was a knock on his door. Yeah? The door opened. 2 men walked in. They weren't security. They weren't hotel staff. They were the kind of men who wore their violence like cologne. You could smell it the moment they entered a room. Mr. Martin, the first one said. His voice was flat, emotionless. Mr. Bonfiglio would like a word, Dean continued, wiping his face, not looking up. Tell Mr. Bonfiglio I'm flattered, but I don't do autographs after 10 p.m. Union rules. The second man stepped closer. This isn't a request. Now Dean looked up. His eyes were cool, measuring. Everything in life is a request, friend. Some people just forget how to ask nicely. Mr. Bonfiglio is waiting in his suite. He expects you in 10 minutes. Then Mr. Bonfiglio is going to be disappointed. Dean! Dean tossed the towel aside and reached for his jacket. I got a dinner reservation. And unlike Mr. Bonfiglio, the people I'm meeting actually said please. The first man's hand moved toward his jacket, toward whatever weapon he kept concealed there. But before he could reach it, the door burst open and Frank Sinatra walked in. Frank took in the scene instantly. 2 mob enforcers. Dean standing his ground, tension thick enough to choke on. Evening, gentlemen, Frank said smoothly. He was smaller than both men, but he carried himself like he owned the room, because in many ways he did. I don't believe we've met. I'm Frank Sinatra. I run this show, and these dressing rooms are private, so unless you've got a backstage pass, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The 2 men looked at each other. Frank Sinatra wasn't someone you pushed around. Even if you worked for Sally Burns, Frank had his own connections, his own protection. Mr. Bonfiglio, the first man started. Can make an appointment like everyone else, Frank interrupted, through proper channels. Now beat it before I have hotel security escort you out, and trust me, that would be embarrassing for everyone involved. The men left, but not before the second one pointed at Dean. Mr. Bonfiglio doesn't forget disrespect. After they were gone, Frank closed the door and turned to Dean. Are you out of your mind? That's Sally Burns's crew. You know who Sally Burns is? I know exactly who he is, Dean said, lighting another cigarette. I also know I'm not his employee. I don't work for him. I work for the Sands, and the last time I checked, my contract didn't include bowing to gangsters. Dino, there are some battles you don't pick. This is one of them. Frank, I've spent my whole life watching guys like Sally Burns push people around because everyone's too scared to say no. Well, I'm saying no. What's he gonna do, kill me? Then he doesn't get to see me perform anymore? Frank stared at his friend, torn between admiration and terror. You're either the bravest man I know or the dumbest. Dean smiled. Can't I be both? For the next 2 weeks, Sally Burns attended every single one of Dean's shows. Same front row table, same stony expression, same message. I'm watching. I'm waiting. Dean never acknowledged him, never made eye contact, never changed his act. He performed like Sally Burns didn't exist, but everyone else noticed. The other performers, the dealers, the waitresses. Word spread through the sands like wildfire. Dean Martin had disrespected Sally Burns, and Sally Burns was making him sweat. On November 5th, exactly 1 week before the confrontation, something happened that nearly broke Dean's resolve. He was walking through the Sands Casino at 2 a.m. after his late show, heading toward the parking garage. The casino was still busy. Vegas never slept, but it was quieter than the dinner hour. Dean was tired, ready to go home, when he noticed a commotion near the high-stakes poker room. A crowd had gathered. Dean heard raised voices. Against his better judgment, he walked closer to see what was happening. In the center of the crowd was a young comedian named Mickey Brennan. Mickey was 24, fresh from New York, and he'd been opening for Dean for the past month. He had talent, good timing, and a future in Vegas if he played his cards right. But tonight, Mickey's cards were all wrong. He was being held by 2 of Sally Burns' men, while a third man, one of Sally's lieutenants, stood in front of him, holding a pack of playing cards. "You think you're funny," the lieutenant was saying. "You think making jokes about Chicago is funny?" Dean's stomach dropped. During his opening act that night, Mickey had done a bit about Chicago, something about the wind being so strong it blows the bodies right out of Lake Michigan. It was a stupid joke. A throwaway line, but apparently someone had taken offense. "I didn't mean nothing by it," Mickey was saying, his voice shaking. "It was just a joke, just material." "Everything's just a joke to you people," the lieutenant said. He pulled one card from the deck, the ace of spades. "You know what this means in my world?" Mickey shook his head, terrified. "It means death. We leave it on people who don't know when to shut their mouths." The lieutenant moved to shove the card in Mickey's mouth, and Dean knew he had a choice. Walk away, let this play out. It wasn't his problem. Mickey had been stupid, had crossed a line, and he'd have to pay for it. That's how Vegas worked. Or Dean could do what he always did, refuse to look away from injustice. "Evening, gentlemen," Dean said, stepping into the circle. His voice was casual, relaxed, like he'd just stumbled upon friends having a conversation. "What's all the excitement about?" The lieutenant turned, saw Dean Martin, and his expression flickered. Surprise, then calculation. "Mr. Martin, this doesn't concern you." "Well, that's where you're wrong," Dean said, still smiling. "See, Mickey here works for me. He's my opening act. So if someone's got a problem with him, they've got a problem with me. He made jokes about Chicago. He makes jokes about everything. That's his job. He made a joke about my drinking last night. Should I rough him up too?" The lieutenant's face hardened. "Mr. Bonfiglio doesn't appreciate being disrespected." Mr. Bonfiglio wasn't mentioned in the joke. Chicago was mentioned. Last time I checked, Mr. Bonfiglio doesn't own the entire city of Chicago. Though I'm sure he's working on it. A few nervous laughs from the crowd. The lieutenant wasn't amused. "You're making this difficult, Mr. Martin." "I'm making it simple," Dean said. "The kid made a joke. A bad joke, apparently. He's sorry. Aren't you sorry, Mickey?" Mickey nodded frantically. "So? Sorry. Won't happen again." "There," Dean said. "Problem solved. Now how about you fellas let him go, we all have a drink, and we forget this ever happened." The lieutenant stepped closer to Dean. "You got a lot of nerve, you know that? Mr. Bonfiglio's been very patient with you, but patience runs out." Dean's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "Tell Mr. Bonfiglio that if he wants to talk to me, he knows where to find me. I'm on that stage every night at 9 o'clock. But if he wants to take out his frustrations on kids who tell bad jokes, then maybe Mr. Bonfiglio isn't as tough as everyone says he is. Maybe he's just a bully who picks on people who can't fight back. The temperature in that circle dropped to freezing. Several people in the crowd gasped. You didn't call a mob boss a bully, not in his town. Not with his men standing right there. The lieutenant's hand moved toward his jacket, and for a moment, Dean thought this might be it. This might be how it ends. Not on stage, but in a casino, defending a kid who'd told a stupid joke. But before anything could happen, a voice cut through the tension. That's enough. Everyone turned. Sally Burns had emerged from the poker room. He'd been there the whole time, watching, listening. He walked toward the group, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. When he reached the lieutenant, he put a hand on the man's shoulder, a gesture that looked friendly but carried unmistakable authority. "Let the kid go," Sally said quietly. The lieutenant hesitated, but boss, I said let him go. The men released Mickey, who nearly collapsed with relief. Sally turned his attention to Dean. "Mr. Martin," Sally said, "you keep putting yourself between me and the people who disrespect me." "I keep putting myself between bullies and their victims," Dean corrected. "If that happens to be you, well, that's just coincidence." Sally's jaw clenched. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. The entire casino seemed to stop. Dealers pausing mid-shuffle, slot machines going quiet, conversations dying. Then Sally smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted interesting prey. "You've got guts, Martin, I'll give you that. But guts only get you so far in this town." "They've gotten me this far," Dean said. "For now," Sally replied. He looked at Mickey, who was still shaking. "Kid, you're lucky Mr. Martin likes you. Next time, think before you speak." He looked back at Dean. "And you, Mr. Martin, might want to think about the people you're protecting, because next time I might not be in such a forgiving mood." Sally Burns walked away, his men following. The crowd dispersed quickly, everyone eager to distance themselves from what had almost become a very public, very violent confrontation. Mickey grabbed Dean's arm. "Mr. Martin, thank you. I don't know what to—" "Go home, Mickey," Dean said quietly, "and tomorrow take some of that material out of your act. The Chicago stuff, the mob jokes, all of it. But you said—" "I said you're funny, but you don't have to die to prove it. Trust me on this." Mickey nodded and left, still shaking. Dean stood alone in the casino for a moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened. He'd escalated things with Sally Burns, turned a personal grievance into a public challenge. There would be consequences. Frank Sinatra appeared at his elbow, seemingly out of nowhere. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" "Kid didn't deserve that," Dean said. "Nobody's saying he did. But Dino, you're playing with fire. Sally Burns isn't some small-time hood. He's connected all the way to the top, and you just embarrassed him in front of his crew. So what was I supposed to do? Watch them hurt that kid?" "Yes," Frank said simply. "In this town, sometimes that's exactly what you're supposed to do. Keep your head down. Survive." Dean looked at his friend. "Frank, if I have to watch innocent people get hurt just to survive, then what am I surviving for?" Frank had no answer for that. As Dean walked toward the parking garage that night, he knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about respect anymore. This wasn't just about refusing to meet with Sally Burns. This had become a test of wills, a battle to see who would blink first. And Dean Martin didn't know how to blink. Jack Intrater begged Dean to apologize. "Just go to his suite, shake his hand, tell him you were having a bad day. That's all it takes, Dino. 5 minutes and this whole thing goes away." "No," Dean said simply. "Dino, these people don't play games. You think you're being tough, but you're being stupid. Sally Burns has killed people for less than this. Jack, if I bend the knee to Sally Burns, I'll spend the rest of my career bending knees. Every two-bit mobster in Vegas will think they can push me around. I'd rather die standing than live on my knees." Frank tried a different approach. He pulled Dean aside after a show and said, "Listen, Pally, I get it, I respect it, but there's a way to handle these situations without making enemies. Let me talk to Sam." Sam Giancana, Frank's friend, the boss of the Chicago outfit, the man who, rumor had it, had helped Kennedy win the 1960 election. "I don't need you to fight my battles, Frank. I'm not fighting your battle. I'm preventing a war." But before Frank could make that call, everything came to a head. November 12th, 1963, 10 days before JFK would be assassinated in Dallas. But nobody knew that yet. On this night, Vegas was alive with possibility, danger, and music. Dean arrived at the Sands at 7:30 p.m. for his 9:00 p.m. show. The moment he walked into the building, he felt it. Something was wrong. The dealers looked nervous. The pit bosses were whispering. Even the slot machines seemed quieter than usual. He found Jack Entratter in the hallway outside the Copa room. "What's going on?" Dean asked. Stratter's face was pale. "Sally Burns bought out the entire front section for tonight's show. 40 seats, all his people." Dean's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "So I'll be performing for the Chicago outfit." "That's fine, they tip well." "Dino, this isn't a joke." He's making a statement. He's saying, "I own this room. I own this casino. I own you." "He doesn't own me. Then what are you going to do?" Dean smiled. That trademark Dean Martin smile that could mean anything from genuine warmth to absolute defiance. "I'm going to do my show, Jack. Same as always." At 8:45 p.m., Dean stood backstage, listening to the crowd filter in. He could hear them. Sally Burns' men, their voices rough and loud, laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny, ordering drinks like they owned the place. Sammy Davis Jr. found him in the wings. "Dino, baby, you sure about this? What am I supposed to do, Sam?" "Not perform? You could call in sick, take the night off. And then what? He wins. He shows everyone in Vegas that Dean Martin backed down. Better to back down than to end up in a ditch." Dean put his hand on Sammy's shoulder. "Sam, you've fought your whole life to be treated with dignity. You've stood on stages where half the audience hated you because of the color of your skin, and you never backed down. You never stopped performing. You never let them make you small. Well, I'm doing the same thing. This is my stage, and nobody, not Sally Burns, not the mob, not anyone, tells me how to perform on my stage." Sammy's eyes filled with respect. "You're crazy, Dino." "I'm Italian. It's in our blood." At 9:00 p.m. sharp, the lights dimmed. The band started the opening music, and Dean Martin walked onto the stage. The applause was scattered, awkward. Sally Burns' men clapped slowly, mockingly. It sounded less like appreciation and more like a threat. Dean took his place at the microphone. The spotlight hit him, bright and hot. In the front row, surrounded by his crew, Sally Burns sat with his arms crossed, his face carved from stone. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. Dean looked at Sally Burns. Then he looked at the rest of the audience. The regular people, the tourists, the Vegas locals who'd come to hear him sing. And he smiled. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Dean said, his voice smooth as silk. "Welcome to the Sands. I'm Dean Martin, and I'll be your entertainment tonight, assuming nobody has any objections." He paused, letting that line hang in the air. Sally Burns didn't move, didn't blink. "I see we've got some special guests with us tonight," Dean continued, gesturing toward the front section. "Fellas who traveled all the way from Chicago. That's a long trip. I hope the flight was smooth. I hear Chicago's airlines are very reliable, as long as you're not flying in the luggage compartment." A ripple of nervous laughter from the crowd. Sally Burns' expression didn't change. Dean walked across the stage, carrying his glass of whiskey. "You know, I've been doing this show for 3 weeks now, and I've noticed something interesting. Every night, there's this one gentleman who sits in the front row. Same table, same seat, never smiles, never laughs, just watches." He looked directly at Sally Burns now. And I thought to myself, "Dino, this man really loves your show. He must be your biggest fan. Either that or he's waiting for you to mess up so he can leave a really bad Yelp review." More laughter, louder this time. Even some of Sally Burns' men cracked smiles, but Sally Burns himself remained motionless. Dean took a sip from his glass, so I did some research. I wanted to know who this dedicated fan was. Turns out, his name is Salvatore Bonfiglio. Salvatorio, that's Italian, just like me, we're practically family. He paused for comic timing. Of course, in my family, when someone visits us 20 nights in a row, we invite them over for dinner. We don't just stare at them from across the room like we're planning their funeral. The audience laughed harder. Even Sally Burns' men were chuckling now. But Sally's face remained a mask. Dean walked to the edge of the stage, getting closer to Sally's table, close enough to see the scar on his face, close enough to see the cold fury in his eyes. The stage lights were hot. Sweat was beginning to form on Dean's forehead, but he didn't wipe it away. Couldn't show weakness, not now. His heart was pounding. He could feel it in his chest, in his throat. But his hands were steady. His voice was steady. This was the moment. Everything he'd built in Vegas, his reputation, his career, maybe his life, balanced on the next 60 seconds. In the wings, he could see Frank and Sammy watching, both of them frozen, terrified. Behind Sally Burns, his men were tense, coiled like springs. Several had their hands inside their jackets. The audience sat in absolute silence, afraid to even breathe. One wrong word, one miscalculation, and this room could become a bloodbath. "Mr. Bonfiglio," Dean said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "I hear you wanted to meet me, that you sent your associates to my dressing room to extend an invitation." Silence. The entire room was listening now. "Here's the thing," Dean continued. "I'm a simple guy. I grew up in Ohio. My dad worked in a barber shop. My mom cleaned houses. And they taught me that if you want to meet someone, you introduce yourself. You shake their hand. You say, 'Hello, my name is Salvatore, and I enjoy your show.' You don't send armed men to make threats." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sally Burns' knuckles were white on the armrests. "But maybe that's just an Ohio thing," Dean said, his smile never wavering. "Maybe in Chicago, intimidation is how you make friends. Maybe in Chicago, fear equals respect." He paused. The silence was deafening. In the back of the room, someone coughed, and it sounded like a gunshot. Dean took a breath. This was it, the line he couldn't uncross. "But this isn't Chicago. This is Las Vegas. This is my stage, and on this stage, respect isn't taken. It's earned." Sally Burns' hands tightened on the armrests of his chair. Several of his men shifted in their seats, hands moving toward their jackets. Dean set his glass down on the piano. "So here's what's going to happen, Mr. Bonfiglio. I'm going to perform my show. I'm going to sing the songs these people came to hear. I'm going to tell some jokes, probably drink a little too much." He gestured to his glass. "And hopefully, everyone will have a good time, including you." He walked back to center stage. "But if you're sitting there thinking you can intimidate me, thinking you can make me afraid, thinking you can control me because you've controlled other people, well, then you don't know Dean Martin very well." The room was silent. You could hear every breath, every heartbeat, because I've been singing in front of tough crowds since I was 16. I've performed in mob-run clubs where the owner kept a gun on the bar. I've dealt blackjack for guys who'd break your fingers if you dealt them wrong. I've seen fear. I've lived fear. And you know what I learned? Dean leaned into the microphone, his eyes locked on Sally Burns. Fear is boring. He let that sink in, so you can sit there with your crossed arms and your tough guy face and your entourage of killers. You can try to stare me down. You can try to make me sweat. But at the end of the day, Mr. Bonfiglio, you're just another guy in the audience, and I'm the one with the microphone. Dean smiled, that famous, effortless Dean Martin smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a show to do." He turned to the band. "Hit it, boys." The band launched into "That's Amore," and Dean Martin began to sing. For a moment, nothing happened. Sally Burns sat frozen, his face unreadable. His men looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The entire room waited to see if bullets would fly or fists would swing. And then, slowly, impossibly, his men followed suit, uncertain at first, then more enthusiastically. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. the tension breaking like a dam bursting. Sally Burns stood up. Every eye in the room turned to him. He buttoned his suit jacket, a gesture of respect, and he nodded at Dean Martin, a single nod. But it said everything. "You've got guts, I respect that." Then Sally Burns walked out of the Copa room, his men following behind him. Dean continued singing, never missing a beat, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But backstage, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. were standing in the wings, their mouths hanging open. "Did that just happen?" Sammy whispered. "I think," Frank said slowly, "Dino just did something nobody in Vegas has ever done." "What's that?" He told the mob to go to hell and lived to talk about it. After the show, Dean returned to his dressing room to find a bottle of wine waiting for him. Expensive. Italian, the kind you couldn't buy in stores. There was a note attached. "Respect is earned. You earned it. S.B." Jack and Tratter burst into the room 5 minutes later. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I performed my show," Dean said, opening the wine. "You called out Sally Burns in front of his crew. You embarrassed him. And Tratter stopped, shaking his head in disbelief. "And he respected you for it." "People like Sally Burns don't respect cowards, Jack. They respect strength. I showed him I wasn't afraid, and that earned me something fear never could." "You gambled with your life, Dino." Dean poured himself a glass of wine. "I gambled with my dignity. There's a difference." Word of what happened that night spread through Vegas like wildfire. By the next morning, every performer, every dealer, every cocktail waitress knew the story. Dean Martin had faced down Sally Burns and won. But what most people didn't know was what happened 3 days later. Dean was having lunch at the Sands restaurant when a man approached his table. Not one of Sally's enforcers, Sally Burns himself. "Mr. Martin," Sally said, his voice surprisingly respectful. "May I join you?" Dean gestured to the empty chair. "It's a free country, last time I checked." Sally sat down. Up close, without the stage lights in the crowd, he looked older, tired. The scar on his face was more prominent, a reminder of a violent life. "I want to apologize," Sally said. Dean raised an eyebrow. "Apologize?" "For how my men approached you. That was disrespectful. I wanted to meet you because I genuinely admire your work, but I went about it the wrong way." Dean studied him. "Why the change of heart?" Sally leaned back in his chair. "You stood up to me. In 30 years, nobody's done that. Everyone either kisses my ass or runs away. But you looked me in the eye and told me to go to hell, in front of my crew, in front of everyone. And that didn't make you want to kill me?" Sally laughed, a genuine laugh that transformed his face. "It made me respect you. See, Mr. Martin, in my world, fear is currency. People do what I say because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. But respect, real respect, that's rare. That's valuable." He leaned forward. "What you did on that stage, that took courage, real courage. Not the courage to pull a trigger, but the courage to stand your ground when every instinct is telling you to run. I've killed men who had guns, but I've never met a man who had nothing but a microphone and still made me blink first." Dean took a sip of his coffee. "So what now?" "Now?" Sally shrugged. "Now I come to your shows like a normal person. I laugh at your jokes, I enjoy your music, and if anyone, and I mean anyone in this city gives you trouble, they answer to me." He stood up and extended his hand. "You've got a friend in Chicago, Mr. Martin, whether you want one or not." Dean looked at the offered hand. He thought about refusing it. Thought about maintaining his distance from this world of violence and intimidation. But he also thought about his father's words from childhood. "Dino, respect every man until he gives you a reason not to. And if a man admits he was wrong, give him the chance to be right." Dean shook Sally's hand. "I appreciate that, Mr. Bonfiglio, but I don't need protection. I've got something better." "What's that?" Dean smiled. "A microphone and the guts to use it." Sally Burns laughed again and walked away. Dean Martin performed at the Sands for another 5 years after that night. He never had another problem with the mob, never had another visit from enforcers, never had to compromise his dignity or his principles. Other performers heard the story and asked him for advice. How do you deal with the mob? How do you perform in Vegas without getting tangled up in their world? Dean's answer was always the same. You treat them like anyone else. You show respect, but you don't show fear. Because the moment you show fear, you're owned. And I don't care how much money they're offering or how dangerous they are, nobody owns Dean Martin. Years later, in 1968, when Dean left the Sands to perform at the Riviera, Sally Burns sent him a telegram. Good luck at the new place. You taught me that real power doesn't come from fear, it comes from respect. Thank you for the lesson. Your fan from Chicago. Dean kept that telegram in his wallet for the rest of his life, not because he was proud of facing down a mobster, but because it reminded him of something important. In a city built on fear, intimidation, and violence, the greatest power of all was simply refusing to bow. November 12, 1963 wasn't the most famous date in Dean Martin's career. He didn't record a hit song that day. He didn't win an award. He didn't make headlines. But it was the day Dean Martin proved that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and performing anyway. It's about looking power in the eye and saying, "You don't impress me." Vegas in the 60s was a city where wise guys controlled everything, where a wrong word could get you killed, where entertainers learned to keep their heads down and their mouths shut. But Dean Martin never learned that lesson. He walked onto stages with the same confidence, whether he was performing for housewives or hitmen. He told his jokes, sang his songs, and lived by his own code. And on one unforgettable night, that code earned him the respect of a killer. Because Sally Burns was right about one thing, anyone can make people afraid. That's easy. But making people respect you, making them admire you, making them applaud even though every instinct tells them to reach for their gun, that's genius. That's pure genius, and that was Dean Martin. The story of Dean Martin and Sally Burns became Vegas legend. Other performers tried to replicate what Dean had done, standing up to the mob, asserting their independence. Most of them ended their careers, some ended up in the hospital, a few ended up in the desert. But Dean Martin was different. He had something that couldn't be faked or taught. He had genuine fearlessness wrapped in charm. He could insult you and make you laugh at the same time. He could challenge you without making you his enemy. It was a tightrope act that only Dean could pull off. Frank Sinatra later said, Dino had this thing where he could walk into any room, a boardroom, a bar room, a room full of gangsters, and within 5 minutes he owned it. Not through intimidation, through presence. Through being so completely himself that you either respected him or got out of his way. Sammy Davis Jr. said it more simply. Dean Martin was the coolest man who ever lived because he never tried to be cool. He just was. And that night with Sally Burns, that wasn't Dean being brave. That was just Dean being Dean. The wine Sally Burns sent Dean that night, Dean shared it with Frank and Sammy after the show. They drank it in Dean's dressing room, toasting to courage, to friendship, and to the insane luck of surviving in a city where most people didn't. You know what the craziest part is? Dean said as they poured the last of the wine. What? Frank asked. I was terrified the whole time. Sammy nearly spit out his drink. You were. You look like you didn't have a care in the world, Dean smiled. That's the trick, Sam. You feel the fear. You acknowledge it. Then you do it anyway. Fear doesn't make you weak. Letting fear control you makes you weak. Frank raised his glass. To Dean Martin, the bravest coward I've ever known. They all drank to that. And somewhere in Chicago, Sally Burns probably raised a glass too.